Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Jim McCormick of agmarket.net and John Payne of HedgePoint Global Markets joining us this weekend. All right, Jim, we've had some time to digest all of this information from the reports that came out last week. A big supply shock with that loss of 1.6 million acres in corn. But as now we've had time to digest all of that, what is moving the markets this week?
Well, right now, I think the market movers is the weather in South America primarily, and then concern about demand. The bean market's been under pressure all week long, tying plain and simple. The weather patterns seem to be changing, not just here, like look what's going on in California. They're getting swamped with rain, but in Argentina, the high pressure front's moving out. That's allowing the first shot of rain, 2 shots of rain here roughly in the next 10 days. And that's, there is damage being done, but the fact is that crop's stabilizing. So stabilized crop in Argentina, plus the big crop in Brazil. The market's feeling a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, John, I mean, when you look at HedgePoint Global Markets, you guys have some analysts and market consultants down in South America with boots on the ground. What are they seeing? Is this rain in Argentina coming just in time?
Yeah, so it's been a nice learning lesson for us, just getting a chance to work with people who are actually working in farms in Argentina and Brazil. You learn a lot from afar away, but to hear those folks talk about it, the season's just so much longer there. And that's one thing I took a while for me to comprehend. They don't plant. If it's dry, they just won't plant it for a while. So they've gotten to a point here where we hit mid-Feb, where it's go time. It's go or let it go. And as Jim mentioned, looking at some better forecasts in the future, I think there's some anticipation here that the crops, we've been pretty hyperactive writing down the crop losses in Argentina. So now it's maybe to add a little bit back here. We'll see on that. Up in Brazil, it's a different story and more of a harvest delay. So Mato Grosso, which I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of, it's a big kind of bean area there. They are slow to get it out. Yields look okay, but it's just slow to get it out. They don't have the infrastructure that we do, drainage, things like that. So they need the rain to stop and then plant corn. So I think given the lateness in Argentina and then the lateness to harvest in Mato Grosso, we could have a period here, let's call it between March and early June, where the U.S. is going to have to step up a little further in regards to meeting demand, specifically in corn. So I think you'll see those front spreads in corn hold in, and we're seeing that today, where May and March are actually firm, but the deferreds like July, September, December, in the corn contracts are getting sold a little bit.
Yeah, Jim, you mentioned demand as well. And in last week's report, we had an analyst describe it as, USDA kind of ripped the Band-Aid off when it came to corn demand, soybean demand, a little bit different story. But what is the biggest concern for you on the demand front, Jim?
Right now, the biggest concern is China, tying. I mean, there's a lot of trade is anticipating China will eventually come to our market and start buying corn. But the reality is they haven't. They've been buying a lot of corn from Brazil at this point in time. And if for some reason China does not come into our market and has managed to essentially avoid it, I think the market's going to not price that in, and we're going to continue to go down. So it is a very legit concern. The other thing we got to keep an eye on is ethanol demand. They didn't make a lot of adjustments there, but the reality is there's a real fear we're going to go into a recession. That's not going to be good for demand for ethanol, and that is, that'll trickle down to the price of corn as well.
Yeah, John, Jim mentioned at China, and we just talked about in news, the population drop in China. Is there any correlation there between the population decline that now they're coming out and saying and the decline in demand?
Yeah, the demand certainly is a problem. I don't know demographics in China, and as Jim would know, the reports we get out of there, you got to take them with a grain of salt. So this week to see them finally admit to that, you just wonder if that's baked in the cake or not. I think on the demand side specifically, we'll start with hogs. This week we got a word that China's going to aggressively cut their sow population. So they're going to liquidate some of their herd here, make up for some meat supply losses they've had during COVID. And how that affects corn demand is a pretty good question. They're not going to be building their herds. Corn, soybean meal demand specifically, I think, are probably a little high here. But again, I think that's a story for Brazil right now. China is setting the stage to kind of operate much like the North African nations did in the wheat markets, where they were buying from the U.S. forever. We had some regime change, some macroeconomic changes, and then all of a sudden they're now buying from Russia, and they're a big Russian client. I think the same could happen here, where a lot of corn demand that the U.S. has been selling to South Korea, Japan, China, that goes down to South America. Thankfully, we have a lot of industry here that can use corn, but on the margins, specifically with ethanol, if that we don't see oil prices really rallying, I think you're going to have the ability for corn to shed demand at these prices should be easier.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, we did see oil prices edge higher this week, plus some impressive trade in the cattle markets. So later on this show, we're going to digest all of that with Jim McCormick and John Payne. Please stay with us.